Welcome to 11 Investigates Case Files. I'm Melissa Andrews. This week, a trail of terror spanning 25 years came to a tragic end. Ashley Morris was 10 years old in 1997 when she was attacked. Her brother and her mother also attacked by the man who had been stalking her mother. He then fired on the ambulances taking them to the hospital. In late June, Ashley, who survived that attack all those years ago, lost her own life to domestic violence. Let's first take a look back at Ashley's story as she told it to Jeff Smith in 2023.
Monroe and Secor, one of Toledo's busiest intersections. It's seen its share of traffic and crashes and demonstrations over the years, but nothing compares to what happened here 25 years ago. It was February 13th, 1998, one of Toledo's most violent and tragic days. And although the horror of that day ended in this spot, its impact has never gone away.
Ma'am, calm down, calm down. Tell me what's going on. There's a guy that just pulled in the backyard. He has got a knife.
You know, there's not a Friday the 13th that goes by that it doesn't come back into my mind.
Hey, dispatch, we got people all over this place here panicking.
I mean, it still feels fresh. You know, I was old enough to still remember everything, so I was 10 and I can remember everything, like everything.
Ashley Morris was 10 when the man stalking her mother repeatedly stabbed her.
Like if I can replay it again, like I'm there. And I remember every little detail.
Joe Chappell worked with and was obsessed with Ashley's mom, Vivian Morris, and he couldn't handle the rejection. That Friday afternoon, he attacked Ashley first.
I got stabbed 14 times. I remember, you know, I got all the scars everywhere. Like after that, I had like it's called like mitral valve prolapse, I guess, trauma to the heart. So I had like heart problems, and I got like tendon problems from getting stabbed in my tendons.
He then went after Ashley's brother Adam before wounding her mom so badly she would later die in an ambulance.
You gotta calm down, Louie. We can't understand you.
Jackson Road, just north of Savannah Avenue. Two ambulance drivers been shot with a shotgun.
Chappell wasn't done. He ambushed the ambulances carrying Morris and her kids, shooting 2 first responders.
I turned to the left and all I saw him was doing was aiming the shotgun at me, and next thing I know, I was flying through there.
He shot and killed 21-year-old Brandy Williams when she wouldn't give up her truck to him.
Was with a shotgun?
I think my son thinks it was a shotgun.
And then the final scene, the chaos, when Toledo police shot and killed him.
They shoot out the back window. Just look at there. He goes. Shots fired. Shots fired.
Put this down. Down.
When you Monday morning quarterback this, do you just rack your brain and think, my God, how in God's name could there be that evil in our town, and how could something like this play out in Toledo, Ohio?
Well, I got to say, it's a fact that there's evil in the world, and we're always going to have it. It doesn't matter where you're at. You can be in the safest place in the world, and bad things can happen.
Former Toledo Police Chief Jack Smith was one of 2 officers who shot and ended Chappell's trail of terror. Captain Joe Heffernan was just a rookie.
And everybody just did everything they could to get that guy that day. We knew that if we let him continue, it was going to end up in
more loss of life,
more carnage. He wasn't going to go down easily.
The last 25 years have not been easy for Ashley. She's been strong ever since she was a kid. A tattoo on her hand showing she's a survivor. A constant reminder of her mom on her shoulder. She stays in Toledo to be close to her mom and the baby she lost. A tattoo for that baby on the left arm. She knows she had friends and classmates who loved and supported her. But still, there are days now that are tougher than others.
You know, because back then, a lot of stuff that happened to me didn't happen often, you know, like it does now. Back then, it was like murders like that happened once in a blue moon in Toledo, you know. Now it's like all the time. So when I hear like stories like that happen like that, it brings back memories, or I'm like into big documentaries and stuff, so sometimes I like to watch it just because I feel like that's happened to me. Like, it's not just me.
What would you say to her now, 25 years later?
Well, I'm glad she survived, and I hope she uses her life to be a person that can bring out that message that you can survive something like this, and be a vessel for good.
They and the other families involved, they're always in my prayers. It was tragic. It was an incredible load for those two kids to carry the rest of their lives, to see something like that happen.
Do you sometimes ask yourself, or, I mean, I don't know if you're religious, I mean, do you...
Yeah, like, why me? Like, why our life? Like, why did I have to get, dealt with the cards I got dealt with, Like, and everybody's like, be strong, like, it only happens to the strong ones, but, like, how long can you be strong?
But she is strong, finding strength in raising her boys, reminding them of their grandma, how she loved her kids, and how she would have loved them.
Well, Ashley Morris, who also went by Ashley Fonseca, died in a murder-suicide just a couple weeks ago on June 25th in South Toledo. Police told us she was shot by Lawrence Moore, who then shot and killed himself in what's being called a domestic violence situation. Ashley was 37. Morris was 46. And Jeff Smith's joining us. We invited him on to talk with us not only about this latest development, but the case in general. When you put two and two together that Ashley was the victim in what you probably reported as a voiceover, no name at the time that you read this story on the air, when you put those two pieces together, what went through your mind?
Just heartbreaking. And you know this, and doing this for so many years, there are stories that don't leave you. And this was one of those. I was a fresh, new reporter in Toledo when that day happened. And hell of a first story, or a first 2 months of my career here in Toledo to cover something like that. So when it started hitting on anniversaries, in fact, on the 20th anniversary, I sat down with all of those responding firefighters and paramedics and officers, and we did a roundtable about the response that day. Moving ahead another 5 years, and I was able to track down Ashley, and she was gracious enough to sit down with us and just have that cathartic moment for her. Because, and you reach out to somebody, you start talking to them, and you think, up until the time when you're physically sitting across from them, they're going to bail.
And to be honest, also knowing this perspective, we want to get the story, and we hope that people like Ashley sit down, but you can I almost would say don't do it to them as well. Well, because I wonder if it's helpful to them or not, if it's just revisiting past memories. Did you get any sense that I noticed that she hid her identity, or you agreed to do that? Right. Why did she choose to do that? And do you think that that was part of her having to relive that in a negative way?
I think that gave her some type of comfort with doing the interview. There was never any reasoning like, I want my face blocked because of X.
Right.
I think it just gave her that little bit of anonymity, even though, as it played out. And we kept seeing the photograph of her as a child, and she had to be younger than 10 there.
Oh, absolutely, and right on point. And of course, the shot of her mom and the family photos that we have. But I just think, in order to agree, in order to sit down, in order to be comfortable, but she was weeping the entire way through, and her composure, the amount she was able to give to us that day, it still was remarkable. She said her brother, we had asked Adam, her brother, as well, or asked her on behalf of us to ask her brother if he would sit down with us, and she said he's just not in a place to do that.
And how old was he at the time?
He was a few years younger.
Yeah. Okay. So Take us back, though, when you said that you were just a new reporter here in the Toledo area. I mean, do you remember the day that the scanner was going crazy? And do you remember getting all those live crews out to the scenes?
Yeah.
Scenes plural, because there were many.
Yeah, the thing that stood out about that day in particular was, and this is kind of a inside baseball kind of thing, but our lead story that day changed 4 times in a matter of 2 hours, because there was somebody, and I'm just taking you back, there was somebody who put a pipe bomb in their ex-wife's car in the tailpipe in Perrysburg. They take it into a service station. Service station gets it up on a lift, looks, sees a pipe bomb. So that was the lead at one point. There was some update to the Cook brothers situation that you guys, 11 Investigates, has looked into. That was a lead at one point. I had a story earlier in the day of a Toledo police officer who had somebody in custody. The person in custody in the back seat managed to get their handcuffed hands underneath their legs, crawl through the divider, put the car in drive, and
That's another lead story.
That was another lead story. So then all of a sudden, the scanner traffic is going crazy. As you heard it play out, and we shared with you in that story, how there were so many different scenes. And I just remember getting the call from my news director at the time, Janet Hundley, who said, "We need you to get to Monroe and Secor. There's been a shooting." Now, we didn't know the scope of what we would find when we got there.
The shooting at the ambulances after the original stabbing scene.
No, this was the final scene. This was when Joe Chappell had been shot and killed right out in front of Best Buy on Secor and Monroe. Friday afternoon, you're seeing it right here.
What was the time frame of this, Jeff? Like, what was the span of time from when the stabbing occurred to when this all came to an end at that location that Secor and Monroe?
It was probably within a zone. I'm going to get this wrong. I think it was within 4 hours that it all played out.
So had you guys known about the original stabbing?
Similarly to what we're talking about in the one that ultimately took Ashley's life, right? There was that scene.
Okay.
But once again, and this is not to say that it doesn't matter to us in a newsroom, but unfortunately, it's another domestic violence situation. And even, we get, I would think at that time, we would get a phone call, maybe a fax from Toledo police telling us that something had happened.
But not necessarily enough to put a reporter on it until we have all this melee happening.
And as it played out, and as you heard, Joe Chappell, he, obviously the first scene, stabbing Ashley, stabbing Adam, killing Vivian, and then he just went on this rampage around West Toledo. There were multiple scenes until he got to the hospital, Toledo Hospital. He was out in one of the parking lots, and TPD ID'd the car he was in, and then a chase ensued.
What did and when a story like this happens, we may cover it for weeks because there's the investigation into who Joe Chappell was and what the relationship was with he and Vivian and the ongoing care of the children and the shooting at ambulances and the victim who lost her life in the carjacking. I mean, there's just so many angles to go. What did you find out about Joe Chappell?
They were co-workers. I believe they both worked at Jeep, and there was this obsession that he had on her. She was not interested in him, and that rejection drove him to madness. And that was that's how it came about, this obsession. And then it turned into a domestic situation but they were never dating, but it was still one of those things where his unrequited love that he had for her, he wasn't having it. And if he couldn't have her, the saying, nobody could.
And did her family ever come forward afterwards and say, we knew this was going on, or did she seem to have any protective orders in place against him?
I believe she took one out. I'd have to go back in the annals of what we had at the time, but I'm pretty sure she had taken something out at work, just saying that I want him written up for advances he's made, makes me feel uncomfortable, that kind of thing.
And it's just, you never know what what was the straw that broke the camel's back for him, that caused him to snap and go after her and her children. You had Joe Heffernan on, who now, I mean, he was young back then, but now he's been in the Toledo Police Department for, it's got to be, what, 25, 30 years or more?
Well, it has to be, because, I mean, you're looking at when this is almost the calendar upon which he works as far as his career is concerned.
Yeah, exactly. I want to revisit something that, in light of Ashley's death now, I thought was poignant that Joe Heffernan said.
Well, I'm glad she survived, and I hope she uses her life to be a person that can bring out that message that you can survive something like this, and be a vessel for good.
They and the other families involved, they're always in my prayers. It was tragic. It was an incredible load for those two kids to bear, to carry the rest of their lives, to see something like that happen.
I got to give a shout out again to Jack Smith. 2 years ago when we did this story, he in Florida now, retired police chief here in Toledo, but just the willingness to revisit this. But go ahead, you were saying about why did that stick out for you?
Well, because ultimately she didn't survive, and I think, he says, you can bring a message for good, that you can survive something like this. And then the chief says it was an incredible load. So you think about all that, and now she has lost her life. And I think one of the reasons we did want to highlight this story is because she ended up losing her life in a domestic violence situation. And I just think there's so much to that. Well,
and it's a lot to unpack. In this past week, I dedicated my entire leading edge programming, and you may have seen it on WTOL 11 Plus already, and if so, I appreciate it. But I put a panel together of individuals who this is their life, this is their investment, this is why they do what they do as far as looking at domestic violence, the reasons for it, the solutions, if there are any. But I have never had anything, and I told you asked me, like, when I heard this connection between that situation that happened and
when you found out it was Ashley, right?
I was heartbroken. Because after our story ran 2 years ago, I'm a dad of 3. And after I interviewed her, I made a commitment to myself that I was going to continue to check in on her. I didn't bring them with me. I don't want to dive into the emails that we exchanged, but I continued to reach out to her, just seeing, are you okay? How are things? How are you doing? What was the reaction? What was the reaction to the story we did?
And I appreciate that, because sometimes we do a story and then we move on, and these are real people and this is their life. It isn't just a story. It isn't just opening up and prying open your heart, and then what happens, we all move on. So I appreciate you doing that. And what did she say?
She would tell me, things are okay. It was never a sunny day for Ashley. It was never a happy moment, but I think she appreciated just the care, the concern, just somebody wanting to know, wanting to check in, because I don't know how that went for her through her life. We didn't have that kind of relationship.
So I want to play another soundbite here where you ask Ashley about this.
Do you sometimes ask yourself, or, I don't know if you're religious, do you...
Yeah, why me? Why our life? Why did I have to get, dealt with the cards I got dealt with, nervous, be strong, it only happens to the strong ones, but how long can you be strong?
I could see where, and obviously I'm no expert in stuff like this, but I would think that if you went through something like this, you lost your mom to this, it would be hard to understand that you deserve more than that, and I feel like when she says, how long can you be strong, that struck me as well.
Right. And hypothetically speaking, you don't know if that was what befell her, the fact that she just couldn't put up a defense any longer, and kept finding herself in situations like this.
Did you know when you interviewed her that she was she in a bad relationship at that time? Do you know? Did she share
talked
that
about
with
her
you?
boys. She didn't share anything about healthy relationships, unhealthy relationships that she's had since that time.
Was that even a thought in your mind though at that time, or is that something that now we're looking back on because we know how she lost her life? Was that something you were questioning? Was how are your male relationships?
I was probably cautious in how I approach things, and from a man interviewing a woman as well, there's a different dynamic there as opposed to me being empathetic and somebody understanding what she's been through. I can't imagine. I did want to say I still can't wrap my mind around. I have a small following on Facebook, but when I posted about this story, how heartbreaking it was, the loss of her life, and the resources that are available out there still that people need to seek out if they are facing this kind of situation. Almost 500,000 interactions of just that one post. So it was palpable for people. They really connected with it.
And we noticed that, and that's part of the reason why we're doing this right now, is because we want this to reach an audience as well, because obviously we have our true crime audience, but the fact that this is what befell Ashley, I think, is definitely worth revisiting. And we don't want anyone to leave this podcast today without some help and some answers into that aspect of this. So one of the women that you talked to was the CEO of the Family and Child Abuse Prevention Center.
Dr. Christy Jenkins.
Yeah. And were you looking for maybe some perspective, or what were you looking for when you wanted to explore this with your Leading Edge episode?
Well, I reached out to not only Family and Child Abuse Prevention Center, the Cocoon as well. I wanted to have a representation of those who understand this better, specifically for what a victim is going through, for what somebody who is dealing with this type of situation. We always say, if we do one story to better one set of ears, then hopefully we've made a difference. And that is our goal each and every time. So that show in particular, I just wanted, if there's somebody out in that audience who maybe something hasn't resonated with them, Ashley is a great example to know what normal should look like, what it should feel like, what is healthy, what is a healthy relationship, what are the dynamics that I should be looking for in somebody or to get away from somebody.
And we don't know still whether she received any counseling as a child, or, after witnessing her mother getting killed, being attacked herself and her brother, and then everything that happened after that, we don't know what kind of care was given to her.
Yeah, don't know what was available to her.
And that's actually very interesting, because here you have a child who's just gone through all this trauma, and hopefully, we don't know, we're not saying it didn't happen, but hopefully there was help given to her.
But anytime, and once again, and I'll hit on it again, anytime you have somebody who is conditioned to a certain understanding of how life is versus how it should
be or should be.
Yeah, and that's a big eye-opening moment for anybody. I mean, if you've sat down with a family therapist or anybody, they're going to let you know X, Y, and Z is what normal looks like versus what it should. What you're describing to me right now, that's not it. That's not how you should live your life. And if she didn't have somebody out there, I feel for her. That is even more heartbreaking.
Exactly. Okay, well, let's hear from Christy Jenkins, who you interviewed, CEO of Family and Child Abuse Prevention Center, just to see how something like what happened to Ashley early on in her life may have impacted her life.
Yeah, so there is an ACE study that they did a while back that took some surveys of a lot of folks after the fact and asked them what happened to them in their childhood. And what we find is folks think that childhood trauma should affect like you getting into drugs or alcohol or breaking the law, or maybe you have mental health issues. But what they didn't know was that it also affects your cancer rate, your heart attack rate. So physically, there's so much that trauma holds in the body. So you are more susceptible to lifetime illness. And folks don't think about that.
That reminds me of the saying, the body keeps the score.
Mm-hmm.
All of the things that stress does to you that you don't even realize, let
Right.
alone the obvious.
Right. The things that are on the surface. And to her point, you don't know what's happening down the road. And obviously, 25 years ago, in this case specifically, you can't tell the future. But what has happened in her childhood, early in her life, really did lay out what was about to come.
All right, we're going to talk more about this. We're going to take a quick break and we'll be back with more. Welcome back to 11 Investigates Case Files. Jeff Smith is our guest this week. We're talking about the tragic Ashley Morris case, a girl who was attacked. She and her brother and her mother killed many years ago by a man who was stalking her mother. And then she, just in the last couple of weeks, Ashley ended up being a victim of domestic violence. Anything else that you gleaned from Christy's answer about surviving what she did and then how this impacted her? We heard a couple of sound bites from Ashley, but you really got to sit down with her and you had those emails after your interview. How do you think this impacted her throughout her life?
I think one of the things that I want people to walk away with, and we had this on our Leading Edge segment, was the counselors, they wanted to really get across to everybody that this is not a male problem, this is not a female problem, it's an everybody problem. You can all be victims of domestic violence, and it's not necessarily, even though in this case the man was the person doing the violence, it can go both ways. Mm-hmm. And there are no demographics, there are no bounds on the demographics or the age groups. In fact, one of the counselors was saying that she has 9-year-olds here in Northwest Ohio who have reported violence because they are already in intimate relationships at 9.
Wow. Well, one of the things that, I've rarely seen a domestic situation that doesn't start first with emotional abuse and manipulation and sometimes grooming and things like that. Mm-hmm. So first, I think you have to, the perpetrator is getting that victim to, oh, I love you and you're so wonderful, and then separating from family and friends and things like that. And then once they have that power is when they start to exert that physical dominance.
Right, which is what Joe Chappell initially went for in kind of the grooming and catering, and probably sweet as can be, trying to get Vivian Morris.
But that's what makes it so difficult, and I know police officers have been frustrated over the years because, you show up to tons of domestic violence calls, and then the victim, usually a woman, ends up not pressing charges, goes back, but without that emotional manipulation, they would be able to leave.
But I found it...
They control their minds.
And I know you're a big fan of true crime, but I found it interesting when we were... One would think that if you experience trauma in life like Ashley did, that you would run to the hills trying to get away from anything like that again. However, she found herself watching those shows, listening to those podcasts, as opposed to the opposite, which that always kind of stuck with me too, because I would think that would just add.
I think it's kind of what you know.
Relatable, right?
It's what you know. Yeah. Okay, so then we asked Christy, we wanted to ask her, how common is it for victims of early trauma to remain vulnerable later in life? Here's what she said.
So the cycle of violence is very prevalent. And so what happens is that's what's modeled for children, and they see that, and so they're more likely to grow up to be a victim of domestic violence or a perpetrator of domestic violence. Not always, but it definitely sets them up in a bad way because they never learned appropriate boundaries and they never learned what's a healthy relationship. And so it's much harder for them to grow up and be in healthy relationships because that's what they saw growing up.
Yeah, it's what's familiar.
Yeah.
It doesn't mean that they, and there is a saying too, I've seen a lot of therapists and things talk about that, you know, attention is attention. Bad attention is still attention. And so if you're someone who is striving for that and you're needing that, then you're still getting that attention, even though it's negative.
Yeah, I think it's worth it for everybody. You may think you're in a perfect situation, you may think you live in a perfect world, but I really focus on people just having a conversation and checking some boxes off to make sure that everything does fall within that. There is a normal, you may think there's no perfect situation, but there is a normal, what normalcy should look like as far as how you live your life and those who are around you and influence.
Relationships in general are difficult because we all come from different upbringings and backgrounds and experiences. And I always kind of joke that, you know, God played a trick because women and men are just so inherently different. You put them together and, you know, live together, and, you know, that's difficult enough sometimes, let alone people are coming with some of these situations and backgrounds.
A lot of baggage.
Yeah. What do you want to leave, I guess, people who are watching, not only in Toledo, but, you know, it could be around the world at this point, we're on streaming, about this case and what you're taking away from it? I mean, starting in 1998 to all these years later, and this is the ending.
You know, I hope, if Adam's watching, if Adam Fonseca, Ashley's brother, I think our heartfelt sympathy out toward him, that he continues to live his life, to Joe Heffernan's point.
And her children.
And her children, obviously. You and I were able to, Ashley did something, you know, gosh, in death. She also did something courageous. She was a organ donor. That was played out on social media. I'm sure if any of you have followed the story, you saw the Facebook post, you saw the Instagram post, where those who loved her and cherished the relationship with her were at the hospital that night, and were able to share that moment with her as they brought her down the hallway. But I just hope those who were in Ashley's life feel that mom is in a better place now. And that's what I put on my post. I said, I hope that Vivian and Ashley are sharing that long-awaited embrace, because you think about her living her life for 25 years without mom, who was taken so early from her in such a tragic circumstance. I hope they find some peace. I really do.
Well, we want to make sure that we leave you with this. Always be safe. If you are in immediate need of assistance for domestic violence, please contact the National Domestic Violence Hotline at 800-799-SAFE. That's 7233. Or you can live chat at www.thehotline.org. Thanks so much for joining us, Jeff. Thanks for the perspective.
Absolutely.
This one did not end well, but I think that we can learn something from it. Hopefully the cycle in Ashley's family has stopped, and continue to keep our hearts and thoughts and minds, prayers with her two sons.
Makes sense.
Thanks for joining us for 11 Investigates Case Files. We'll see you next time.